All right, so in this training, I'm going to show you how to define your premise. You should be able to do it in 15 minutes or less. Now, you'll probably notice that this training is longer than 15 minutes, and that's okay. It's going to take me longer to explain how to write your premise than to actually write it. So once you know how, you're going to be able to whip right through it, and honestly, 15 minutes is probably too liberal an estimate. It'll probably take you 5-6 minutes to do it eventually. So let's dive in. As I said, we're going to use the snowflake method here, start broad and slowly add details to become more specific. So what is a premise and why is it important? Most people either don't know or are mistaken in their definition. I will give you a small disclaimer here, though, that some people call a premise or a premise statement something different than what I'm going to call it. So it's just one of those things where the same term can be used for several different things. So if you hear it defined differently, that's not wrong. Sometimes people just call different things by similar names, and that's okay. So let's talk about what a premise is not. A premise is not a single character. It's not the setting. It's not even a circumstance or situation. That's closer, but that's still not a premise. It's not a problem with an obvious or direct solution. So if your problem is that, your character is lonely and wants a girlfriend, well, the obvious solution is to have him go find a girlfriend, right? That's just not, it's not complicated enough. If you're talking about a problem with an obvious solution, then it's not a premise. It's also not a synopsis or a blurb. Some people get these things mixed up because both of them have to do with stating your book's plot in a general sort of way. But a synopsis or blurb is what goes up on Amazon or Apple or Kobo or whatever retailer to get people to buy your book. It's the little, blurb about your book that tries to entice them to buy it. This is different. Even though they are both short statements that deal with plot, they're completely different. They have different aims. They're going to be written completely differently. So definitely not the same thing. A premise is a clash of ideas. It's when many ideas come together to create a unique character journey. So all of those things I listed, setting, character, situations, problems, many of them go into a blurb, into a premise statement, but by themselves, they can't be considered a premise statement because we need a lot of different parts working together to create a unique character journey. Now, here's this definition again that I love. Story is a metaphor for a journey that leads to change. Okay, so I've already given you that. Your premise statement is the statement of that journey. So think about that and let that sink in. If the story is a metaphor for a character journey, the premise is the statement of that journey. It's just the way that you say what it is. So why do you need a premise? Why even teach you how to do this? Well, partly because you need to be able to state your story concisely and recognize its various parts. Now, a premise statement is very broad. We're going to get into very few details here. So that's why we're starting with this. You're definitely going to want to make it more detailed as we go along. But if we can get you to be able to recognize the 4 principal parts of the story, it's going to make your life a lot easier. Otherwise, you'll always be floundering, trying to figure out where to go in your plot. This also really can center you if you start to lose direction. So as you're planning, if you're trying to figure out whether a particular scene will work in the story, you can come back to your premise statement and ask if whatever you're planning or whatever you're writing right now is going to serve that premise statement and keep the character on that journey. If not, chances are you're going off the rails and writing something that you're probably going to need to cut later on. So you are going to learn to state your premise in a single premise line. It goes like this. When some event sparks a character to action, that character acts with deliberate purpose until that action is oppressed by an external force leading to some conclusion. Obviously, that's a little bit abstract, but once we start putting details in, you'll understand it a little bit better. So we are going to use A New Hope as an example for this. I'm sure you're shocked. So let's fill in the details of Star Wars Episode 4 to fill out this premise statement. When the Empire shows up to kill Luke's aunt and uncle, he acts by going on an adventure with Obi-Wan to become a Jedi and fight the evil Empire. until the Empire pushes back by trying to destroy the rebel base, leading to Luke fighting in a huge star battle and blowing up the Death Star before it can destroy the rebel base. So let's go back again. So once again, it's when some event, something happens that sparks a character to action. That character, in this case Luke, acts with some deliberate purpose. He is trying to do something in reaction. Until that action, whatever he was trying to do, is opposed by an external force, that would be the Empire, leading to, this is where you're going to put in your ending, or possibly your climax. So once again, let's read through it one more time. When the Empire shows up to kill Luke's aunt and uncle, he acts by going on an adventure with Obi-Wan to become a Jedi and fight the evil Empire, until the Empire pushes back by trying to destroy the rebel base, leading to Luke fighting in a huge star battle and blowing up the Death Star before it can destroy the rebel base. So this is basically a statement of what happens in that movie, right? There's no details. We don't get anything about other characters or the adventures Luke goes on with Han, but this is the basic gist of Luke's plot, right, in that film. Now, I want you to notice that this is quite clunky. It's kind of a mouthful to say, and I did that purposely because I wanted to show you the different parts of the premise statement. So I put in things like he acts and the Empire pushes back by doing this, and that makes it clunkier. So down here, I rewrote it and just took out a lot of the unnecessary words. So this flows better, but the top one helps you see the parts of the premise statement better. When Luke's aunt and uncle are murdered, he leaves home to train as a Jedi. The Empire pushes back by threatening the rebel base. Luke fights in a huge battle and destroys the Death Star first. Okay?
Would you like to experience an exact step-by-step process for how to drill down to the story you're telling and build out from there? More than that, would you like to effortlessly create more superfans, garner better reviews, and sell way more books than ever before? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you are in luck. There is a specific technique that will allow you to drill down to the emotional core of your story and write it from the inside out. 90% of authors who are writing and publishing today are not doing this. But we're talking about up-leveling your storytelling technique and making you a master storyteller. This works for pantsers and plotters alike. It works for any genre, any trope, any type of story, any type of character. This is going to be a 12-week mastermind. So if you are ready to become a master storyteller and create a foundation for your fiction business in 2022, this is the mastermind for you. I'm taking applications right now, and all the details are there. bit.ly/storyteller accelerator. And make sure and capitalize the S and the A, because that will make a difference. I cannot wait for a select few of you to learn this technique, because it will be a game changer for your fiction writing.
Let's talk about each part. When some event provokes the protagonist to act. This is your inciting incident. Now, when you're writing your premise statement, you can also put in some character descriptors if you have them. Because we already filled out our character Bible, you should be able to do this. So you can say something like, when innocent farm boy Luke Skywalker's guardians are murdered, and that just gives you a little bit more detail on the character and where we're starting. The character then has to act. The protagonist at this point can team up with one or more people to accomplish something specific. So we're getting a little bit more detail here on our premise statement, and you can put in a little more detail when you're writing it if you want. This is where you would talk about the core relationships of the story. Not only what the character is trying to do, which would be his tangible OOD, but who will be with him on the journey. So you could say something like, Luke joins with a princess, a smuggler, and a retired Jedi to bring down the Empire. It's a little bit more specific that way. Until the protagonists are met by some external force that generates disorder and/or chaos. This will be your villain or antagonist, and it also should set up the final battle. So here we would say, until the Empire fights back, I had to try hard not to write that as strikes back, by targeting the rebel base with total annihilation. So can you see how this is setting up the final battle? Because them targeting the rebel base is the final battle, right? So you might want to throw that in there to really give your story some direction. Leading to the conclusion of the story, which leads to Luke fighting in a huge battle and blowing up the Death Star. Now, notice that in this premise statement, you are putting in the ending, which means you're putting in spoilers. This is exactly why it's not the same as a blurb. You definitely don't want to be posting this on Amazon, okay? This is just for you so that you know what your story is, so you know where you want to end up. You don't have to show it to anybody else, and you probably shouldn't, because then they'll know the ending of your book. So here's our final premise line. When innocent farm boy Luke Skywalker's guardians are murdered, Luke joins with a princess, a smuggler, and a retired Jedi to bring down the Empire, until the Empire fights back by targeting the rebel base with total annihilation, which leads to Luke fighting in a huge battle and blowing up the Death Star. Still a little bit clunky. I still have some extra words in there, so I wheedled it down a bit. I bolded the words that kind of show each part, but because I wheedled out the extra words, it's a little bit harder to recognize them. When innocent farm boy Luke Skywalker's guardians are murdered, Luke joins with a princess, a smuggler, and a retired Jedi to fight against the Empire, until the Empire targets the rebel base with total annihilation. Luke fights in a huge battle and ultimately blows up the Death Star. Do you see the character journey? This is the external plot journey for Luke, but it's a one-paragraph statement of pretty much his entire journey from beginning to end in that film. It's perfectly okay not to have all of the details of the premise just yet, since we haven't planned them. Now, I think you guys probably have a pretty good idea because we've done the internal and we've done the characters and we've done the world building. You probably have at least some idea. But if when you're planning your story, you're not quite sure, for example, what the climax is going to look like yet, that's okay. You may need to figure out your characters and their external journey first, which is what we're going to be doing in this module. But start with what you can and make sure the premise is complete before you start writing. So if you don't know what some of the details are, you can put in something generic as a placeholder. So if you don't know who exactly is going to be, for example, with Luke on his journey, you could just say he meets some friends who help him along the way. Maybe you don't know exactly what form that's going to take yet, but just put something generic in there so you have an idea of where you're going with it. If you're not sure how it's going to end, you can put something about which leads to the hero facing off with the villain and achieving victory. You know kind of how you want the story to end up, even if you don't know the details yet. Whoops, I went backwards, sorry.
Hi there, we'll get back to the episode in just a second, but really quickly, I wanted to tell you that I have a free PDF that I created for you entitled 10 Plot Thickening Events That Every Fiction Bestseller Includes. These are events that you need to be familiar with because they have to do with the human template and how all human beings absorb story. And I have laid them out in a free PDF for you. So if you would like to download that absolutely free, you can do so at bit.ly/10plot. Make sure and capitalize the P. I've had people tell me that it's not working and they're getting a page not found. It's because you got to capitalize that P on 10plot. Okay, so that is once again bit.ly/10plot, and I will link it up in the description below.
All right, so action tips. Get out a pen and paper. Go through the steps and write I wrote thesis statement. That should be premise statement, sorry. If you don't have all the details yet, that's totally fine, but put down what detail you have and broad blanket statements about the rest. You don't really need to free write yet because it's really supposed to be pretty broad. Okay, so like I said, I would almost rather you do the blanket statements and just say, hero, antagonist, victory, that sort of thing, because we're going to get into more detail in later videos. And for right now, you just need a very basic statement of your character journey. Okay. I want you to refer back to this often as we move forward. You may be able to change the details as you get them, as we keep planning. But also, as I said, it can keep you on track if you start going too far off the rails from what your character journey needs to be.